From lingering questions over planned driver's license changes to the Premier's level of pipeline optimism after meeting with the PM and the clash over PC party branding. Time now for tonight's politics panel. Joining us this evening, Najib Judd, a political advisor and brand strategist who's worked on election campaigns at every level of government here and abroad, and John Brennan, political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the Premier responding to questions being raised by Alberta's Privacy Commissioner over a move to add citizenship details to driver's licenses.
Well, Manitoba has had citizenship on its licenses in the past, as has Ontario. So I think we can manage through it. There's 67 countries in the world that have citizenship on their government issue ID, and part of the reason for that is to make sure that the people who are accessing social programs are entitled to access those social programs.
Earlier this week, the Premier announced that mandatory citizenship markers will be placed on IDs in late 2026. On Wednesday, the province's Information and Privacy Commissioner questioned the change, saying her office wasn't informed or consulted, and it's unclear what the benefit for Albertans would be. Najib, what do you make of the Privacy Commissioner weighing into this, and how might that change the context of debate over these changes?
Well, let's first address the Premier's comment. So, the key word there is has had. Ontario, BC, Quebec, Alberta have tried this in the past. They all stopped doing it because it was a violation of privacy, a violation of human rights. Not to mention the fact that it's redundant. It's not the jurisdiction of provinces to monitor citizenship. And the fact that it's inefficient. What are you going to do when people change their status from PR, from permanent resident to citizenship? There's an added cost, because then all of those driver's licenses have to be updated. It's just silly immigration politics. Let's call it what it is. That's all it is. You're setting up a two-tier citizenship. You're allowing now landlords and employers and other frontline service workers to discriminate if they choose to against permanent residents, against international students, against temporary workers. This is all this is. It's voter suppression. Let's call it that as well, because now you can discriminate against people, even though permanent residents have an entitlement to vote. You're going to allow for that, And again, so what? I mean, so now we're going to have a provincial police force that can then conduct mass deportations based on citizenship. Like it's again the Trumpian tactic, the south of the border. There's no new ideas. It's just deflects from their failures, deflect from this government's failures on unemployment, failure on homelessness, failure on housing, failures on education, and keeping our healthcare and education systems afloat. This is failure after failure, and this is just another way to deflect by trying to blame the other. At a time when there's record Islamophobia, record anti-Indian hate, all of this type of discrimination going on, and they're just further flaming it to distract from their own failures.
So John, what makes introducing these changes necessary now, from the government standpoint?
Well, there is no real reason to introduce them now, Michael. And, it was informative that the Information and Privacy Commissioner said that she hadn't been consulted before the province drew up this initiative or this new policy. And so, it's really in a vacuum. And as the Information and Privacy Commissioner said yesterday, what issue are they trying to address here? What problem are they trying to solve? And so my thinking on this, Michael, my analysis of this is this another example of Danielle Smith and the UCP government proposing a solution in search of a problem, very much like their proposal to get rid of the RCMP and create an Alberta provincial police force, or to get rid of the Canada Pension Plan and create an Alberta Pension Plan. Both are very unpopular policies. Both are unwanted by Albertans. And as far as I can tell, Michael, Albertans did not call for this. So this is something that the government internally decided that they were going to do with no consultation. And so here we have it. Now they've introduced it, and there's a big furor. This is what happens when you don't consult with stakeholders and your own bureaucracy and with people like the Information and Privacy Commissioner before you make announcements like this.
Najib, to what degree do you see this dovetailing with a new mandate letter for the Jobs Minister, directing Joseph Scow to use all legal means possible to give Alberta more control over immigration?
Well, yeah, I mean, this is exactly, as I said before, this is all, again, some sort of immigration politics and tactics to control immigration. Immigration into Alberta is a good thing. It's bringing more money into the province. It's bringing more people who can do some of the jobs that need to be done. Immigration is always a good thing. What are you going to do? And also there should be some lessons learned of what these immigration politics and what's happening south of the border, where now tourism is down. Is that what we want for Alberta? People afraid to come to this province to visit visit the Rockies, to come to our big cities, because that is what's going to happen if people think that they're going to be discriminated again based on what's on their driver's license. They're going to stop coming to this province.
All right. The Premier also commenting on her meeting last week with the Prime Minister, and she's expressing a degree of optimism.
Well, the pipeline to Prince Rupert isn't on the list of projects to be fast-tracked yet. That can change soon. We actually have been assured that there are ways to continue to add projects to that list. It's going to be an evergreening process. We are in active discussions about that right now, and I'm very, very encouraged by where our talks are heading.
Daniel Smith addressing their business leaders in Calgary on Wednesday. The Premier believes a pipeline to the coast and an Alberta carbon capture initiative are both front runners to make the next round of major infrastructure projects to be announced before mid-November. John, how does expressing this degree of optimism reshape the Alberta-Ottawa dynamic?
I think it's a really positive development, Michael. It's positive for Alberta and it's positive for Canada. I was very pleased last week after Premier Smith met with Prime Minister Carney in Edmonton, where he was here for the Liberal caucus meeting, when they had that very positive meeting, when they were both effusive in their praise for one another afterwards. And then to see Premier Smith's comments to the Calgary Chamber of Commerce yesterday, it was again very positive and very positive about her working relationship with Mark Carney. And I think Daniel Smith has finally got it through her head that Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney is an economist, a businessman who had a lot of experience in business and international affairs. And he has a completely different viewpoint of the economy than Justin Trudeau did. Trudeau's focus was on environmental regulation, on climate change. Mark Carney's view is we have to expand the economy and we have to diversify our markets. So he's willing to look at a new bitumen pipeline from Alberta to BC. He's willing to look at other economic development and resource development projects, mining projects and others. And so it really has been a sea change in Ottawa, but it's also been a sea change in the Premier's office, Michael, that they've come to realize that this change in the federal government, and they're now willing to work with Mark Carney and his government.
Okay, so Najib, what happens though if a pipeline, carbon capture projects are not on the next anticipated round of major initiatives to be announced in November? What comes of the dynamic then?
Well, that's exactly what the Premier left out, right? Right now, exactly 0 Alberta projects are on the Prime Minister's priority list. So hopefully that changes. And the way to get that to change is to play nicer and to get along and to understand that all levels of government need to get along. It's like only in politics do we allow this type of antagonistic attitudes. Where I'm going to fight the government, I'm going to fight this party, I'm going to fight that party. When actually we elected you to all get along and get done what needs to get done to do the best for the citizens. So it's nice to see a little bit of a change in that attitude and understanding. And it might be because now that the Alberta government's also looking at deficits, versus before they were looking at surpluses and maybe felt they didn't need any help. But now, they're looking at some deficits down the line and realize that they need help from Big Brother.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the continued tussle over PC party branding. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. We heard from Peter Guthrie off the top this evening, one of 2 former UCP MLAs attempting to revive the Progressive Conservative Party and facing continued pushback from the Smith government. Najib, the UCP calling on Guthrie and Scott Sinclair to cease and desist. What do you feel Albertans should take from that?
First of all, good on the Alberta Party making themselves relevant again after being, relegated to less than 1% of the vote in the last election. So good on them. It's interesting if what Mr. Guthrie's saying is correct, that they now have the reserve on the name, on the PC name, then this is pretty cut and dry for Elections Alberta. If the person who actually owns the name or had the name reserved is now with the Alberta Party and, and has transferred that ownership or is allowing the Alberta Party to use that name, then it's pretty cut and dry. If that's not the case and it's still the UCP that own it, then it's going to become much more complicated. And also, after the Elections Alberta decision, it still then becomes a Canadian court decision as well, depending on the Alberta Party's appetite for litigation, because Canadian trademark law says that if you don't use a name or a trademark for 3 years, non-use, then you no longer have rights to it. You have to show use, and the UCP hasn't used the Progressive Conservative name since like 2017, so they're well past that. So there is a next level to it. Even if the Alberta Party is denied by Elections Alberta, they can appeal it based on trademark law.
John, what's to be made of the Premier's rationale that you can't have two Conservative parties on a ballot? How much confusion would that actually create?
Well, you actually can, Michael, and we've had more than one Conservative party on the ballot in the past. It's quite clear, though, that Danielle Smith does not want these two former UCP MLAs to call themselves Progressive Conservative MLAs, because they would have a presence in the Legislative Assembly and they would have 2 years to organize leading up to the next provincial election. And that's a lot different than some of the fringe parties we've had in the past with the name Conservative in it. And Danielle Smith knows well what happened federally back in the days when there was two Conservative parties and the Liberal Party was able to win majority governments with the two Conservative parties splitting the vote. So she doesn't want this to happen. But I think Najib just spelled it out quite well there. At the end of the day, this decision is going to be taken by the Chief Electoral Officer with Elections Alberta, not by the UCP government. And if, in fact, they do have the name reserved, and I take Peter Guthrie at his word, then they're going to be able to transfer it and make it into the Alberta Progressive Conservative Party. Now, that being said, that's not going to stop the UCP from trying to prevent this from happening. And I would expect we might see some litigation down the road.
Najib, you said a moment ago, good on the Alberta Party for accepting this name change. But surprised at all that the members of that party would vote so overwhelmingly in favor of this? The figure that's been floated around is 94%.
Yeah, they're, I think, smart enough to realize that the Alberta Party brand has been severely damaged over the last two elections. And that the Progressive Conservative brand is still strong in Alberta. So, I think it's a smart decision. I would maybe advise that maybe, Alberta Progressive Conservatives might be more difficult to defend than maybe new Progressive Conservatives or something like that, which is something they can cross if they're denied the registration. But at the end of the day, what Albertans are going to be looking for is PC values, right? I mean, the progressive part of Progressive Conservatives has been abandoned in the province, right, and by the UCP. So I think that if the Alberta Party can now get back to those Progressive Conservative roots and show those values to Albertans, there's a lot to build on there, and there's a big space. I think, I think the Alberta Party has too long tried to be a centrist party where, I don't think that what they believe that the amount of voters and appetite for centrism isn't what they think it is, but the appetite for a brand of progressive conservatism, I think, is very legitimate with Albertans.
John, to what degree is the clock now ticking on these rebranding efforts? Might there be a snap election to factor into the equation, as some are out there speculating at the moment?
Well, Michael, I've been one who's never thought that there was going to be a snap election. And anytime Danielle Smith is asked about it, she poo-poos the idea. So, I really don't think that's going to happen. And as Peter Guthrie said in his interview with you, Michael, Elections Alberta has said they'll take 60 days to make the decision. So I suspect we're going to know sometime by the end of October. But, what I've said in the past on this program, Michael, and we've talked about this idea, even if they get this approval to change their name to the Alberta Progressive Party, they still have a long road to hoe, Michael. They have to organize 87 constituency associations. They have to have a founding convention. They have to elect a leader, who I presume will be Peter Guthrie, elect a board of directors. They're going to have to raise money. You just don't flip a switch and create a new political party. There's a lot that goes into it. So just getting the name change is only the first part. Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair are going to have a lot of work ahead of them, Michael, to make it into a viable political party.
All right, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there for time. Good to see you both. Thank you kindly for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Michael.